Welcome, Parthajeet sir. We all are waiting for your insights and views on significance of foundational learnings in 21st century.
All right. Uh, Very good afternoon, everybody. My sincere apologies for not being able to come there in person. I think we will also talk about it as we go along. But really, very very grateful and thankful for the opportunity to speak on the 130th birth anniversary of late Srimati Tarabai Modak. Uh, I think we as a country are really indebted to people like pioneers like her for where our education system is today. Because let's not forget that it wasn't the case when she was around, we have while we can still there are a lot of issues that we are trying to solve. We have made a lot of big leaps and movements forward. So really, really thankful for this opportunity, and it is very relevant also. It's counterintuitive. While she lived in almost in the 19th century, did a lot of work in the 20th century. Why somebody like her and her work would be relevant in the 21st century, in the early childhood education or foundation learning as we speak about. I think we will unpack those as we go along. I'll just quickly show you the agenda that I have to discuss today. If we can move to the next slide. Um, so I think we will talk about what are the big disruptors, or we'll try to do a little bit of a crystal ball gazing into the 21st century, and what are the big disruptions happening to the way we have typically known education systems or education sector. And then we will look at what's happening in terms of both policy, provision, program planning, and implementation on foundation literacy and numeracy across the country today, in which I will also try to bring some examples from different states that we are aware of or working with, and what's happening there. And I think ultimately we'll leave some time, hopefully, for some discussions and questions and answers from all of you. Um, and be a part of this discussion on very very relevant in discussion on early childhood education and foundation learning. So moving forward, I think what we see are the big disruptions in the 21st century. Before we get down to that, I always love to go back to history a little bit. So if you start with the history of innovations that have shaped humankind and the story of the Homo sapiens species that we are, if you look at the changes that have brought about these, whether it is starting from the agricultural revolution to subsequently paper, and these are really game-changing innovations, right? That really change the way we live and interact with each other, and make sense of the world around us. If you see, some of the earlier changes and disruptions took quite a bit of time, thousands of years and etc. And going further, literally you see the first industrial revolution coming up with the steam locomotive and machines and light, and then innovations in the field of medicine, such as the coming of penicillin, and technology, whether it was with the technology, flights, and then computers and so on. I think if you go on and take on these things further, you see literally the time gap between different innovations and these game-changing, innovations is really decreasing. So I think things are moving at a very, very rapid pace. So much so today that every new day a new AI technology is coming up, and God knows, I mean, all this presentation was probably made by Chat GPT and not by me and my team. That's also a possibility. So moving further, I think the other big disruptor that we see today is actually the way of world is fundamentally changing, right? And I think I've done a lot of work in this area in the higher education and the skill development side, where we constantly try to see what is happening in the industry so that, let's say, our education systems can react to it. It will always lag behind it. That's okay. But we're always trying to create, okay, these are the skills or jobs in demand. So computer science, if it's not by design that for the last 20, 30 years the STEM or the science, technology, and all of that got so much prominence, because that was what the market needed, that was what the society needed, the economy needed, the business needed, and so on. But looking ahead, it's going to really, really change things that we're talking about, whether it is augmented reality, additive manufacturing like 3D printing and stuff like that, crowd and, Internet of Things and all of this. These are creating jobs which nobody thought even existed. Even things like memes. Today, one can aspire to be a memer, in his or her career. What kind of skill set that requires? How do we prepare kids for a society like this? And there was a survey which said, World Economic Forum report, which says that 65% of our kids today in the primary classrooms will end up being in a job which doesn't exist today. You and I don't know what that job is, right? Let's say, he or she could be making that robotics, or let's say, driving that drone up, up in the air, or designing software for driverless cars. How do you prepare kids for that? These problems don't exist today. Some of the problems they will solve will be very new. Skills, we have not heard of these skills. How do we teachers and educators prepare our kids for today? So essentially the question we are asking is, what will be the nature of this education 4.0, which will respond to this industry 4.0? So that's the other big disruptor. And I think as all of this is happening, it is very important to remember the individual and the way the individual is interacting with the family, the society, the relationships is also fundamentally changing, right? I think somebody, Yuval Noah Harari said, we don't need to give any information to the kids. Today, there is an information overload. We need to help people to make sense of the information they have. Even the very, very young kids, they're born digital native. They can swipe right or left or, move up the video, close the video. It's almost like they learn it from their mother's wombs, right? But that's how the society is changing. The limited time and interaction. Today friendships is probably become reduced to likes or thumbs ups and thumbs down. How do we help our kid navigate through all these things? How does he make sense of emotions? How does he know about empathy? How does he be sensitive to others? And all of this, that is also a big change in the 21st century that we need to be aware of. And finally, I think I'll talk about something, as I was saying, there is a reason that why I'm not with you today. And the short reason is actually the pandemic, right? The COVID-19, which has affected us. And I think I got tested positive, unfortunately, before this. So see, what that meant was that, the schools, like we saw, schools were disrupted and closed for a very long time, right? And that could potentially, and we saw that potentially could reverse years and years of gain that we made out of so many years of reform. Such disruptions could come from anywhere. That was a health related crisis or pandemic. We could have an environment crisis. Extreme heat is already affecting people and the way they interact. Odisha, it's not unnatural. I live and work out of Odisha. I'm Odia myself. We always have these school closures because of this. In Delhi, we have school closures because of pollution. In Assam, we have 2 to 3 months of school losses because of floods in Bihar and all of that. This is real. This is not some scientific theory or paper to be debated. This is happening. The reduced number of time to task and teaching and learning and other stuff which will really, really affect us will really, affect everybody and disproportionately affect, let's say, girl child and people from low income households. So what needs to be done is to really, not just, I would say, prepare, children for green jobs or, get these higher, environment sensitive projects in higher education, but even in school education, incorporate these things, these sensitivities into our curriculum, into our pedagogy, teaching, learning materials, and what the children think, see, and play around, make them more aware and connected to the environment, which is what I think, some of our early pioneers like Shrimati Modak and others would know intuitively. That's how our system was. If you look at a tribal or indigenous society, they know the importance of environment from the beginning. They don't need to be taught about it. Probably we're losing sense of it, and we need to think more about it as we go along into the 21st century as well. Moving further, I think so. This is just a nice summary of what the current learner or the future learner of our society will need to deal with. So many things, right? So many things just she has to deal with. So what our system needs to do, to sum up what I was trying to say about the 21st century, if we can move to the final slide of this section, that, more than knowledge, I think the focus should be on certain skills and certain mindsets that we empower our children with, so that they can deal with all these changes. Essentially, I'm saying we cannot ever prepare our kids fully for this all of these changes. It'll always we'll always play catch up. So the best way is to prepare our children for all of these things. So starting with that, I think first I'll talk about the what people are calling as the learning and innovation skills, the 4Cs: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. They will be extremely important in the 21st century, right? And going further, there'll be the life and career skills. I think all of us, will enter into world of work and all. So as I was saying, you cannot prepare potentially for a coding skill or a coding language. All of this is obsolete. Really, tomorrow computers will code much more accurately and faster than all of us humans put together. So no need to, learn about the latest Python language, C++, and all these things. It'll all going to change very fundamentally. Flexibility and adaptability will be important, self-direction, self-learning will be important, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, because all of this, is right now is driven through technology, so our ability to engage with technology and learn will be very critical. But you see, this is the outer crust. This will all happen if the basics are there, which is what people have been calling, it's nothing. This will be always relevant. 18th century, 19th century, 21st century, which is the basic skills of reading, writing, and basic mathematics to get the sense of the world, right? The 3 Rs, which is now being called as foundation literacy or numeracy. So I think that is at the core, and somewhere of all of this is the learning to learn, or the ability of children to, and us to make sense of this new world. So that's how, our education system has to prepare itself for the 21st century as we go along. Yeah, so that's my point. I think we cannot lay foundations for future without, we can't step into future without laying strong foundations today. So let's look at how our policy program and, what is happening on ground to prepare kids for this future. How are we laying these foundation bricks? How are we laying out these layers today? Let's go ahead. All right. So I think this is a great starting point. There are a lot of experienced people here in the audience who would remember some point of time we made schooling, the access to schooling and equitable schooling, a priority, right? Education for all framework, Jomtian Declaration, and so on. And then the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan came in, the MDG prioritized it. So 20 years of policy, program, and focus got us where we are today. Similarly, I think today that the NEP has prioritized it, called it out so much so that the rest of the policy will not become relevant if you don't achieve FLL. Great starting point. Great intent, clear messaging that this is priority, and there will be a mission and program available to it. So I think policy-wise, intent-wise, full marks to us. At least we have now very fairly and squarely recognized that our children are not learning as much as we want them to do, and it's an emergency. So good one first step. But that is also thankfully followed by, policy needs to be followed by intent, needs to be followed by action. So there was a mission which was launched at the national level, right? A lot of state governments have gone ahead and created their own missions or their own programs or strengthened their own existing programs. At CSF, we work in almost 12 states. So we see all the variety where governments like Assam and, Haryana and others have created Nipun Ahom, Nipun Haryana, and so on and so forth. A lot of governments have strengthened their existing programs like Padhao Punjab in Punjab, and including Maharashtra's program, or let's say states like Telangana have started a new program called Tolimattu, which literally means first step, and Tamil Nadu has a program called Ellum Ardum, which is their FLN program, and so on and so forth. I think that's the strength, or that everybody recognizes it and going for the create programs to it. They have set goals that you have to achieve it in a time-out manner. All of this, including as in the Nipun, money is being provided, partly, through the central Samagra Shiksha, where TLMs are being sponsored, money is being provided. So that's not a challenge. You're actually also financing whatever you're wanting to do. And similarly, state governments are also putting their own share of money into all of this. Curriculum, which is a support structure, right? New frameworks, curriculum, teaching, learning methods, TLMs are being promoted by NCERT and others. They're also putting their efforts. CBSE doing its own work on strengthening the assessment framework, and so on. Another good thing is also, they're also creating a consistent marker, whether it is through the National Achievement Survey or the Foundation FLS study, which I'm sure everybody, many of you here in Maharashtra would have also participated, so that we know very clearly, are we making progress or not? on learning. So I think that's the second step, positive step that has been done. So broadly, what we are seeing is, there are almost 5 key areas or components of this FLN program that any state needs to do with a lot of intent and commitment for this to happen. The first one is to be very clear about the goals and be consistent in measuring also progress against these goals. This is a little tricky because enrollment was still straightforward. Get all kids enrolled in schools, their names need to be there. We saw that one easy, attendance was still tougher, right? But similarly, learning, we have to get clear, measurable indicators and outcomes so that we can say. That's the first one. Second one is the focus on the pedagogy. The teaching learning in the classroom has to fundamentally change, starting with the materials, going on to the teacher training, the one-time teacher training, and then the continuous teacher training, the professional development of the teachers, and the teacher support. Charlotte, if you can, just click ahead and show. So this is what the other academic component of this program is, the 2, 3, and 4. And ultimately, the robust tech-based monitoring systems, which help with regular review and data-based informed decisions. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. We'll continue. So we'll show some examples. The slides and all these details are available. I don't want to delve much into it. I think the idea is, as a whole, completely well-knit unit with the learning outcome framework there. How do you track, the children's are making and other stuff, and vocabulary, and they learn from all of this. So this is one, this is the fun unit of the one aspect of the academic design, and Then I think talking about the first one, which I talked about, the goal setting and communication. I think an example I'll give you is from Bihar, where we conducted a large baseline survey to help the government at least understand where they are in terms of where the kids are in terms of the basic skills and competencies of FLN. And the results, we also usually get simple averages, right? They aren't very helpful, but you can get results on all these skill sets. And this is just for language. And in all these details, where you can look at the percentage groups and how children are going ahead, and then ultimately use it to set targets. If this is where I am today as a state or as a district, where do I want to be at the end of the 5 years? And subsequently, also the important thing is not to do this once. Do this after again a year or two and see if I've made progress, stayed there, or come down, and appropriately take steps against it. Again, many other states are also starting to do it, and I'll talk about teacher training. Again, everybody, we've been doing teacher training under Samagra Shiksha for a very long time, but we all know they're not done very well, Sometimes we know that probably the cascade is there, we can't do much about it. There will always be learning loss. But we have seen some basic principles in a state in Madhya Pradesh where we've applied these things, right? Simply remove the cascade layer and, just brought everybody to the state level and trained them. That significantly helped us to, I would say, reduce the cascade loss. The other thing we did was, as opposed to a lot of concepts and things like that, we focused and tied the training very closely to the TLM. Everything is in the TLM. All the design, what the teachers need to do, what principle they need to do, when do they need to introduce a subject, when do they need to do the assessment, how do they do that? All of that in the TLM. So no need to give them theory about it. Let's then just use on practical demos of how to do this, use these materials in the classroom, and then have that discussion and let the trainers do and create that experience for the children themselves or the teachers themselves, as if the teachers with the children, how do they do and use it? So that's what we did and we tried to do. And the results were really, really good. I think there was very positive feedback of the training. I think the point is many training programs can claim this, but this is not by external training. This is the state government's training. When I say we, it's the government of Madhya Pradesh. They decided these things, including, starting with very simply, they said, look, we have 2 lakh teachers. We can't train all of them to this quality this year. Let's just select 1 lakh. We will do. So these are some decisions to be taken and the government has taken, and at least it has helped the training quality of the training imparted. I think finally, I'll talk about two other points. One, we know, that is still one-time training, right? I think what is important is to create a buzz that, a teacher in the classroom feels that somebody cares about what's happening in my classroom. And that can only happen if somebody comes to the teacher every day or every week or every month. And for this, the government of Telangana created a pyramid of accountability, where they created a cadre. There wasn't actually, there was vacancy, there wasn't a cadre. So they created a cadre of cluster headmasters or head teachers to regularly visit schools. So these people would cover all teachers in their cluster and ensure that, it's not, somewhere they're coming and having a cup of tea and going back. They're coming with a, classroom observation tool. They're doing these observations. They're talking to children. They're assessing their skills, and then they're going back. So that was ensured. And it's not just that person is coming, right? That person, senior officer, is coming all the way to the DOs. Everybody keeps on saying DOs are too busy, too busy. But, if you're too busy to do the most important job, what are we busy with? So DOs were also mandated to come 5 schools per month and visit and, do a check. So it created an accountability pyramid, and the observations, more than, monitoring and all, it was more for the support. There was supposed to be a conversation happening. What happened after this? And we very quickly saw, people are probably not getting the skill and all. So we iterated. The SCRT faculty and the diet faculty, they created videos. Look, this is what, if you see this is what is a good evaluation of micro competency. Or this is what, a good, let's say, oral reading means like, or let's say guided reading looks like. Just look at this video and see if this is happening or not. Because this was done for the very first time. But it's creating so much energy and genuine care in the system that people are caring about FLN. So teachers are fairly motivated and keen to do good stuff. Finally, I think, for us, any large state system, like any of our states, we need good monitoring system to ensure that things are progressing. These are governance mechanisms ensured, also required. So we saw in one of our states like UP, I think they had created multiple then sets of data collection because, UP is probably the biggest of our state in terms of scale, of the sheer number of schools and others. So they started different things, right? Something for student assessments, something for, as you saw, school observations or classroom observations, and something for the visit. So different data collection apps were there. There are always most of the states there. But I think visualization also we see has happened. But they try to do it and visualize in a manner it made more sense for the people to do. But ultimately, what is very, very seldom done is the action, right? Or any use of the data. I think that is where we saw some promise in some of the states, whether it's UP or Tamil Nadu, they have a TNVN app that's being used very well. In OSMA, there was something called, Odisha, there was something called OSMA, which was used very well regularly for classroom observations and tracking the basic FLN infrastructure and processes in place. I think that's where, and I think the idea is then these things are fed into the cluster meetings or the monthly meetings or the diet reviews or the DO reviews or district reviews. Otherwise, those things can't operate in isolation, right? Nipun and all talk about these structures to be created, but these structures need data and evidence to have a meaningful conversation, right? And vice versa. These data might be produced by people like us and others many, many times, but if nobody uses them, no conversation happens out of them, then it will not be very useful. So to sum up, I think what I'll potentially say is that, I think doesn't 21st century skills and all those things that I talked about in the beginning doesn't need a new happiness or innovation curriculum or stuff like that. All of that can be incorporated into the existing design of the academic design of the state and the curriculum and the pedagogy. Teachers need to incorporate all these things, into their, I think you all know far more better than me that, children learn so much by just observing, not by what the teacher is saying, but how she is saying, by just following what the teacher is. That is why it is so important. So all these things, some of the other things which I mentioned, how to interact in a society, in an environment, how does the teacher speak with other people, the children will just learn, not from what the teacher says, but what the teacher actually does. So I think the curriculum framework, if you look at it, I think I think you will find more similarities. I think there are points of convergence more than the points of divergence. They're not diametrically opposite things. I think if you look at the Nipun Lakshas and all, while there is a very sharp focus on literacy and numeracy skills, they go beyond. They talk about the, the health and well-being of the child and all of the other stuff, the developmental goals, and even the, the recent NCF, the National Curriculum Framework for Foundation stage, does a very holistic job and captures all these things. Children need support for all of these things, and teachers need a lot of support to do all these things in a holistic manner. It's an interesting bridge and gap that we have to, right? Some of these problems are 19th century problems in essence. Our school systems should be able to give basic foundation literacy and numeracy to almost all children. That's not happening. That needs to solve. And at the same time, we need to prepare our kids for all these, the whirlpool or the whirlwind of changes that the 21st century will bring about. So what are we saying? Essentially, I think, in Maharashtra or any other state or wherever we are learning programs or launching programs, we need to sustain, and ensure that all our FLN efforts are continuing. And I think very important thing I want to call out is it's not good enough to do these things in isolation. This year we will do teaching learning material. Next year we will do teacher training. That will just defeat the purpose. You know, at 2 years after that, I will measure outcomes. I'll set up a monitoring system 3 years later. It's not going to work like that. It's a program. All of these components need to be brought together and work at the same time. Many initiatives have happened, but at isolated times. Hence, they're not in totality. They've not been so successful. So that's one point I'll make. Second point I'll make is, as I'm saying, there are a lot of changes happening. We have to be ready to adapt and iterate as we go along, because as I'm saying, we are laying our foundations for future, and literally we have that responsibility of ensuring how the 21st century will shape up, because all the people who will shape the 21st century are sitting in our classrooms in our schools today. Thank you so much.
थँक्यू पार्थजीत फॉर युअर वंडरफुल सेशन. जसं आत्ता सत्रामध्ये आपण पाहिलं की मागील 2000 वर्षांपासून सुरू असलेला हा इनोव्हेशनचा प्रवास आणि आत्तापर्यंत आपण ChatGPTपर्यंत सगळेजण येऊन पोहोचलेलो आहोत. आणि 21व्या शतकातील मूलभूत कौशल्य जे क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग, क्रिएटिव्हिटी, कम्युनिकेशन आणि कोलॅबरेशन याची सांगड आपण FLN मिशनशी कशा पद्धतीने घालणार आहोत आणि संपूर्ण भारतामध्ये FLNच्या अनुषंगाने कोणकोणते प्रयोग सुरू आहेत याचा थोडक्यात आढावा आत्ताच्या सत्रामधून आपण घेतला.
Thank you, Parthajeet. We hope you all are enjoying the conference so far. I would like to remind you the lunch is being served outside the conference hall. Yes. So before that, if anybody from us have questions for Parthajeet, please go ahead. I'll go.
जे दाखवले त्याच्यात व्हिजिट्सला ठेवलेले आहेत वेगळे शाळांमध्ये, की त्यांनी जाऊन इन्स्टेटचे हा घेणं हे करण्यापेक्षा ते करावं. ते कसं त्यांनी मॅनेज केलं आणि ते काय कन्सेप्ट आहे की निपुणचे वेगळे कोऑर्डिनेटर्स का, हे नाही समजलं. आणि ते कॅस्केड ट्रेनिंगचे 2 मुद्दे मला हवे आहेत.
Would you kindly repeat it, please? And I could get some elements of it, some cascade and other words, but please make the question. So I think I'm gathering that it's a question around the Telangana example that I gave, right? I think how and I was saying Telangana actually doesn't call it the Nipun Telangana program. They call it Tolimattu, which is first step. So it's their own program. So they created. MP, I think MP example was more for the training. I think and I think the role of the Nipun coordinators was to ensure that people are turning up in this question. So that was a typical training program, ma'am. I think as any of our training programs run, and the role of the SRG, DRG, and others, how we have been also doing in Maharashtra. Similarly, that was done in MP. There were certain principles that they changed where it was, significantly, I think it gave some different results and different impact to the training.
Cascade training, and you are saying that you are giving the training directly and you are not losing from a lot of
I'll come to the point. I'll come to the point. So no, got your point. So see, I think basically we cannot completely get rid of cascade, right? As we all know, so many teachers. But at least they removed one big layer, ma'am. That's what they did. I think, see, it's how it's, and I'll talk to it. So the state level people, so there was no training at the district level. That's what they said. Everybody who's going to train the teachers have to come to the state, and we will train all of them at the state. You might ask, this will incur a huge cost. Who will then train all these trainers and all of that? The state said, that's okay. We will do that. They pushed us. They pushed every academic partner. There was Room to Read. There were us CSF. There were other people also. And they said, look, and the SCRT and everybody. They said, you increase your capacity, but at least we ensure that the first level of training is of very high quality. And you can imagine that training ran from 3 to 4 months then. Like typical master training at the state level, will get it done in a week, no, in any state. And then they'll have to go down to that and all that. So they said, no problem. They sort out some venues, sort out some where people could be trained in different batches. The answer also can't be that we will create a batch of 120 people and train. Then we know that training is also of poor quality. They said, no problem. We have to run parallel batches only. Let's find venues and all. Those are problems that can be solved. What you can't solve is when the cascade goes out and then, the variability in the training comes in. So that is how they changed. That is how they changed, and that is, really gave a lot. And then, they followed up these things. So no concepts, no gyan, no lot of, deep sessions on, this thing and that thing. They tied everything to the TLM and everything, how this TLM is to be transacted, how that is to be done, how that is to be done. And then they also followed up that with small videos of all of that. So in case people forget. And that was all done at the same time. That's what I'm saying. It's not the later, right? So if you create TLM this year and train people next year, which is also, madam, what many states are doing, including where I'm sitting today, Odisha, they created teacher materials, the TLMs in 1 year. That year, they could not train the teachers. This year, they're training. It's not going to yield results. Teachers have already got the TLMs last year. They didn't know what to do with it. And now this year, as you're training them on the previous year's materials, you will send them new materials this time. It will not be very useful. They tied it up. Materials are ready. With the materials, how to do the training, they did it at the same time. So we see a lot of benefit of, actually teachers being able to do that in the classroom as expected.
And the second question is need for facilitators visiting schools regularly. You created another facilitators in MP's example you told this.
No, I think, but that's an important point. Let me take that time. I think, madam, usually there are the CRC cadres and others in most of the states, right? I put it under Samagra and all. But in Telangana, there wasn't that cadre. There were 2/3 of their positions were actually vacant. So they thought, and also in many states, I don't know the situation in Maharashtra, but in many states, what we have seen is, the CRC cadre is actually not, they're not into teaching duties for a very long time and etc. So in Telangana, they decided that, we will use our cluster headmasters who are broadly in charge of 10 to 12 schools, and they've been headmasters, they do these duties and etc. to actually, undertake these classroom visits and classroom, observations. So that was the cadre they created. They did a certain things, and then they call it mandal at that level. And then, that was the nested level up over them. And then all the way, as you saw, to DO. So even DOs were supposed to visit certain number of schools. And again, because they're DOs, it's not like they'll come and, the principal will serve, they'll all serve them tea, chai, nashta and come back. No, he also has to sit in a classroom. That will also be tracked. So all of this is also tracked all the way from the district collectors to the secretary, madam, at her level, that who's visited, who are the people who are supposed to visit X number of schools did not visit and all of that. So everything is tracked, including there's a squad at SCRT and Samagra, their officers, senior officers, they're also making these visits, including, some of them then are joined by our team members and all. They're also, everybody is then, following the same observation checklist. They're also sampling a bunch of kids and assessing them, and everybody is getting that data.
Parthajeet, this is Shashank here. I was very interested in how you mapped out how the technological revolution has really increased in the pace of things, and with the generative AI coming in ChatGPT, the future of the jobs is going to be looking very different. Now, how do we ensure, the skills of, the creativity, collaboration, all those things can be taken into account? So, self-regulation, because all these, there's also AI on the other side, which is making all these digital products, screen time very addictive, right? And we are being consumed by the data rather. So, the world of tomorrow is going to be divided between two halves, one who can use the power of AI and the ones who can't use, who will be crushed. So how can we ensure that the children of tomorrow who already are access to technology can leverage that already, and especially coming from smaller towns? Thank you.
Okay. No, I'll take a stab at this with a clear caveat that anybody who sounds too certain about the future is going to be wrong, right? So I'm not going to be very, very sure about it. But let me say, but great point. I think, and I think the difference is, every industrial revolution or every technological innovation like that brings this fear of job loss and all of that. Part of it is true, right? And I think what we have seen is it also, while a lot of jobs go away, a lot of new jobs are created, right? While the horse carts and bullock carts and all went away, a lot of new jobs came in. Drivers of the locomotive engines and so on and so forth, right? I think while some of these go away, new jobs will be created. But what will be difficult, as you're saying, is so new jobs will be created. Who's writing the codes for these chat GPTs and the robotics and all? So those are new jobs are also coming up. While drivers will go away, somebody will need to write the codes of the driverless cars, right? And ensure that these are functioning. And that's not one. Somebody has to then, there are a lot of legal jobs which will be created. What if a driverless car hits somebody in the road, and who's liable and all of that, right? So a lot of legal jobs will also be created. But I think the difference this time around, as you rightly said, is that it's easy for us to retrain, let's say, a locomotive driver or to a different kind of driver, right? But this kind of job is very difficult. To change somebody from a driver, we can't train that driver who's driving our Uber or Ola today into write codes into what of our kids today. That's a huge number. I think, and just want to make this small point. You saw very, very, in a small diagram, but there are a lot of kids who can't read any words today. Those are literally illiterate kids. While they're in schools and all, they're not getting any of it. And now the data, the way we are measuring is unmasking all of this. Average will hide it. 27, even if we say 37% of kids in Maharashtra are able to reading comprehension questions, it still doesn't tell me how many kids are not able to do anything or get a single question correct. Those kids are at serious risk. And if by FLN we are able to raise alarm on those kids and move them to somewhere in between, I think then my contention is, these people are then enabled or empowered a little bit to take that decision. Okay, this is not happening. I need to get into this kind of course and do this. He can do that. But without this basics of 3 hours and all, he's not enabled, and you're saying he's at a serious full. He's then looking at a really, a wrong side of this whole change and revolution. If they have certain basic skills, and as educators, we have given them that mindset to learn, then he can manage. If some job change has happened, something has happened, he will learn to quickly adapt, and that's going to be the nature of jobs. Gone are those days where you had one education and one career, right? That's already gone. We have to reinvent ourselves every 10, 15 years these days. In future, people have to reinvent, get a course. It'll only be valid for 2 to 3 years. And that's how even the higher education system is changing. You have multiple entry and exit points. The NEP talks about it. That's how it will be. But without the basics, those people are really staring at the wrong end of the barrel, in fact. No, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks to Garima and Shalet so much for helping me with this.